From the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, I have come to set the earth on fire, and how I wish it were already blazing. There is a baptism with which I must be baptized, and how great is my anguish until it is accomplished. Do you think that I have come to establish peace on the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, a household of 5 will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. A father will be divided against his son, and a son against his father, a mother against her daughter, and a daughter against her mother, a mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. The Gospel of the Lord. I sense 2 general responses in our hearts this morning following our readings, particularly our Gospel reading. The first being, why would Jesus say that? You know, so much of what we understand of Jesus' ministry to be is one of reconciliation between the Father and us, between other people. I mean, Jesus ate with sinners and tax collectors, and, you know, he draws people to himself. So why would he say that he's come to establish division on the earth? But the second is kind of from a different angle. The second response of hearts this morning is, I know what that's like, right? I know what division amongst family is like. And division in general, yes, but for not a few of you, you know what it's like to be rejected, ostracized, just set apart because of your faith. Within your family, either for a particular reason or just the general expression of your faith. And in our hearts, you know, we think Jesus is supposed to save us from division, not cause it. Yet we also know that just having faith at all sets us against the ways of the world. So Jesus doesn't value the division for its own sake, right? That's one thing to be clear about. Jesus doesn't value the division for its own sake, but neither does he value unity for its own sake, right? Family or any group, I mean your group of friends, you know, united by something that isn't particularly good, or even just a group of friends that's just united by, I don't know, just a common interest or thought, isn't the same thing as being united in the Lord. And being united by something that's not good or something that's evil isn't anything better than being divided by faith, right? So unity in evil is not better than division in faith. Jesus' words today in this gospel passage are almost more observational than prophetic, right? He doesn't value division for its own sake. This is almost just reading into the world what happens as a result of faith. He was actually quoting a prophecy from the prophet Micah, who was describing what would happen in light of the purifying fire that would come from the Messiah's reign at the end of time. And Jesus says this prophecy almost word for word. What he's come to do is set father against son, mother against daughter, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. And again, not just for the sake of that, but he wants to usher in his reign, right? He wants to usher in the purifying fire that's set through his passion, death, and resurrection, through his sacrifice of love. And what Jesus really desires is purification. He desires holiness. He desires renewal of the world, renewal of our very selves. And it's something that's achieved by plunging or being baptized in the purifying fire that's lit by Jesus. Now here's the thing, the result of that fire itself, even begin with ourselves, as we turn our life over to the Lord and into that purifying fire, what happens? We automatically develop divisions within our own hearts, within our own minds, within our lives, between good and evil, right? As we turn away from sin and pursue holiness, already this division arises. But it's something that necessarily spills over into the rest of our relationships as well. But here's the thing. The real division is between those who have submitted to the purifying fire and those who haven't. Right? Those who accept the invitation and the demand for conversion and those who don't. It's not firstly between perfect and imperfect. It's not firstly between absolute holiness and sinfulness. It's firstly between, have you accepted the invitation into the purifying fire of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, or haven't you? And even in the midst of this, we don't abandon hope just because we see that division arise between those who have entered in and those who haven't. Because really, in the end, even as I say this, I think about, how many people you can't entirely determine, have they accepted or haven't they? Or are they about to or haven't they? So we don't lose hope just because we see the division between persons in this particular way. Now, I take great solace in the letter to the Hebrews that we heard today. And for one thing, just knowing, okay, to enter into the purifying fire of the pursuit of holiness and responding to Jesus' call in my life is not something that's easy, right? It really is a taking up of your cross and following every day. But we hear that Jesus, for the sake of the joy that lay before him, he endured the cross. And so for us, as we face the entry into the purifying fire of his love and his sacrifice, we know that it won't be easy, but we know that on the other side is the joy that he so longs to give us. Jesus, too, despising the shame of the cross, he didn't care what was going to be thrown at him. He's received his reward. He's taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. What was part of his motivation? Consider how he endured such opposition from sinners. His pursuit of obedience to the Father's will, his pursuit of holiness, his pursuit of salvation for all of us automatically set up division in his life and his relationships. And he endured that opposition in order that you may not grow weary and lose heart. He knew that it would be a struggle in our lives, that we would see these divisions rise up, and that at times we might become discouraged. So he wants us to look to him for example, that he persevered in spite of the divisions that arose in his life. And the last line always kind of just makes me smile. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood. You're right, nobody's ever cut me because I followed the Lord. Time may come, but it hasn't come yet. I have not yet shed blood in my pursuit of holiness and in light of the divisions that arise in my own life. So where does it lead us going forward? I think there's really three things that rise up for us today that we can let sink deeper into our hearts. For one, to let the fire of Christ's love to really envelop us, right? The fire of his purifying grace from the cross to surround us, to really take on that pursuit of holiness and the sense of urgency that he speaks with today. How I wish it were already blazing. Secondly, to not be afraid to speak up, to speak the truth, to invite others to faith, just to speak up for what you know to be true. To be bold, knowing that almost necessarily in our lives divisions are going to arise because of our fidelity to the Lord. I find it interesting that we hear in our first reading about the prophet Jeremiah being thrown in the cistern because the king and the army don't like what he's saying. Well, Jeremiah is the one who's trying to be faithful to the Lord. And he hears the Lord say to him, tell the army to surrender to their enemies. And the Lord knows that he can take an event like that and really preserve and purify and restore Israel to what it was, what it needs to be. And yet the army and the king, not seeking fidelity to the Lord, hear that prophecy and they say, no way, I don't want any part of it, we're just going to eliminate you. Right? So in his desire to speak the truth, to speak the word that God has spoken to him, naturally that division and that opposition arises. But maybe even most especially for us, even, initially we need the fire of Christ's love to surround us. We need to speak up and speak the truth, especially in the face of evil. But maybe most specifically today, the Lord wants us not to be disheartened by the divisions that arise in our relationships and in our lives due to our fidelity to God. Right? This moment is not the end. Right? And like I said earlier, we have hope that the Lord can draw all people into that purifying fire, and we hold out hope that all might accept the invitation. But to be reminded that just to be united for the sake of being united, to be united in falsity, right, is harmful or meaningless. And in some cases, the fact that we have these divisions in our lives when we have sought fidelity to the Lord is a clear sign that we take Jesus seriously, right? That these divisions have arose. As well, maybe just to close and send forth, I'm reminded by Jesus' words of the purifying fire of God's word to us through the prophet Isaiah. And Isaiah says, "Do not fear, I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, nor will flames consume you, because you are precious in my eyes and honored, and I love you."